All right, team. This video is going to be dedicated to Pimville Station, so make sure that you have your packet out in front of you and also a writing utensil to follow along. Feel free to go back and re-listen to parts that need more clarification. Again, to reiterate, sometimes it's just helpful to hear things multiple times before they really sink in to your understanding. All right, so we're going to be looking at the poem Pimville Station. And if you were in class on the day that we read it, we looked at those pictures of the plans that are happening for Sequoia Station. And we talked about what's going to happen to Sequoia Station and then also what's going to happen to Greater Redwood City and what that signifies for the people who live in Redwood City to have this station completely changed before their eyes. And we said that it would cause things like an influx of people in the area who work in tech and have a lot of money. It would drive up the prices of people who currently live in the area. And it could also create some stress, people could be temporarily out of work if they don't work in construction, or the businesses that they work at within Sequoia Station are maybe shut down. And I think that we ultimately decided that it probably wouldn't be the best thing for lower income people to have those changes happen to Sequoia Station. We talked about Sequoia Station because it kind of parallels what Sepamla does within this poem, Pimville Station. He, as a Black South African, and we don't know that yet when he first starts describing it, but we will later in the poem, he's going to be describing these changes that he's able to notice that exist within this one station and how the station serves as a symbol for all of the gentrification that's happening within South Africa. So Pimville Station is actually a station that is in a location. So remember that the locations or the reserves were areas where Black South Africans were forced to live. And so they have primarily used it as a way to get to different cities to go to work. So the white parts of the cities where they usually worked. And within this poem, we're going to see how the white people have eventually started moving into their area or passing through their area, and different changes that have been created that show that this station is being improved or built better to suit those people who are passing through. All right. So the title itself is pretty self-explanatory. It's Pimville Station. It's the name of the station. He's going to be talking about that train station. And he starts off with just some observations. And remember, I wanted you guys to think about perspective throughout this poem, and what kind of perspective he's guiding us through, and how he guides us through the perspective too. So it's almost like he's starting us out from this bird's eye view of Pimville Station, and then he's going to focus in on certain areas of Pimville Station, and then he's going to end the poem by talking about what it's like for him to live right next to Pimville Station. Okay, so he starts the poem off in stanza 1 by saying, on the one side stood a ticket office, 2 poles overlooking it, one bringing light and the other a link with the outside world, or the world outside, excuse me, both symbols of its higher status in the surroundings. Okay, so remember that this poem was written in the 70s. So the light pole, and then also the speaker, which is the connection to the outside world or the link to the outside world, those are both signs of technological improvements that are happening to the station. So I'll say that one more time. Those are both technological improvements that are happening to the station. So by doing that, it's automatically making the station itself become this higher status, or it creates this higher status for itself in comparison to the surroundings. So the businesses that surround it, and then also the homes that surround it as well. Okay, so unlike the train stations that exist within the area that we live in the Bay Area, most train stations have food, grocery, other stores that are all around it and also within it. For us, I mean, Sequoia Station is its own example. There definitely is that around it. For San Francisco, it's not always the case. It's not built into the train station. You have to exit the train station in order to get to those different vendors or sellers. Okay, so it says, under the same roof was a fish and chip shop, too busy frying to watch it smell. Okay, so this is his little nod to the fact that more British people specifically are passing through this train station. There's food that's tailored for them with the fish and chips, and it says that they're too busy frying to watch it smell. So it's very busy, meaning that it's getting a ton of business from these British people who are passing through the station. Behind it, and this is the fish and chip shop, behind it was a sulky pair of toilets. And the word sulky is like sad. And so if you were to tell me that a pair of toilets looks sad, I would think that that is a gross bathroom. It's probably smelly, it's probably dirty. It would make me sad and sulky if I had to use it in an emergency. And so this station is not totally improved. Little improvements have happened so far. The whole site was like a pregnant cockroach waiting expectantly. When he writes this line, it makes it sound like maybe he's building from the toilet line, and that would kind of make sense for us as the reader of this poem. Like, oh, yeah, I could associate cockroaches with that gross pair of toilets that exist within the train station. But if you also think about that last line as him speaking to the whole scene of Pimville Station, cockroaches are almost impossible to kill and they reproduce very quickly. And so, as he's looking at all of this, these little changes that have happened so far, so the light pole being put in, the speaker being put in, the food that's being sold, he feels like now that it's started, now that the cockroaches have come in, the metaphorical cockroaches have come in, that it's going to be almost impossible to stop it or to kill it. On the other side, languished, it means weak, a ramshackle general dealers. So a general dealers is a pawn shop where you usually go to sell your possessions in order to get some money in case you need it. Too old to care for its looks. So again, the surroundings, he's describing it for us. There's this pawn shop. It's not in very good shape. It doesn't really look very good from its outside. It's also been there for so long that it just doesn't really care what it looks like anymore. And in that stanza, he's using personification, where he's making a nod to old people. Once they reach a certain age, maybe they just stop caring about what they look like. Two sides were linked by a steel bridge, crouched over the single track line quizzically, like a hunchback resting elbows on the table. So remember, he wants to still show that this whole station has not yet changed, that he can feel the changes that are happening. And so there's two sides of the train station that have been linked together by a steel bridge. And he describes it as the steel bridge is like crouched over the single track line, the train that's coming in and out, quizzically, so kind of like, what am I doing here? I don't understand this, like a hunchback resting elbows on the table. Because they would be like, what is this bridge being used for, to connect these two other places that aren't that nice? Why would you want to go to either of these places? The platform looked like a street pavement, raised waist high. This was Pimville Station. So remember that the platforms that we talked about in class, sometimes they can be raised, sometimes they can be lowered. And so he's talking about how this platform is waist high. And then he pronounces at the end of that stanza, Pimville Station. As hundreds of passengers jostled and scurried out of the fenced-in station yard, I came to understand the scene on Noah's Ark the day after the floods. So there's a biblical allusion in there when he talks about Noah's Ark the day after the floods. And then he's also talking about, and in reference to Noah's Ark, we know that all of the animals and people were loaded onto Noah's Ark to save them from the flood. And then he says that as hundreds of passengers jostled, and to be jostled is to kind of be like pushed around or tossed around when you walk through a crowd. I'm sure that we've all experienced this at some point when we've been at a concert or a busy grocery store, or maybe an amusement park, or even walking through the halls when we used to walk through halls of the high school. And they scurry, where they're not really trying, they're not running, but they're moving quickly because they're trying to get out. This is also almost animal-like description too, to be jostled and to scurry. Usually we don't talk about humans scurrying, but in this instance he's talking about passengers. And then he reiterates this animal reference with Noah's Ark, how the animals were put on his ark. And so he's saying that these people are like animals. Okay, and now he gives more description of the people who inhabit the train station. The railway policeman on the beat stood out in the crowd, and to be on the beat means that you're on the job. So we know that the policeman is at work because he's standing out in the crowd, and it says like a lighthouse. He was always blowing hot and cold to be at a pitch for arresting anyone. So lighthouses are generally something that helps people avoid danger, but for this instance, he's kind of like this lighthouse. Um, he's simultaneously trying to get people to avoid the danger, but then yet he's also the danger as well. So where it says he was always blowing hot or cold, hot meaning that he might always be really angry, cold meaning that he doesn't have a very personable or nice or protective personality. And how do we know that? In the very last line of the stanza, it says to be at a pitch for arresting anyone. So he was ready to arrest anyone who committed any sort of infraction or crime or made a mistake that happened in front of him. Any area that's really highly policed too is also, it shows that it's not that high of a status. And the speaker of the poem, or Sepamla, might be trying to say that these police are now showing up because the people who are passing through the train station feel like they need to be protected. On and around the station, business was brisk. Brisk meaning that it was popping, it was snapping. Peanut vendors, thugs frisking fellow travelers, women roasting mealy cobs, and an herbalist brooding over a dry root. Okay, so this stanza stands in direct contrast to the stanza that happened before with the fish being fried with the chips. There's all of these references that are very unique to South Africa. So peanuts were being sold. There were people, thugs frisking fellow travelers. So like pickpockets were happening, robberies were happening, women roasting mealy cobs. Mealy is a form, it kind of looks like corn on a cob, and an herbalist brooding over a dry root. So this is like someone who is using homeopathic remedies to sell to people. Homeopathic meaning that it's taking natural things that are grown from the earth in order to sell them to people to heal whatever sickness they might have. Each morning before the Eastern wink, oh yeah, one last thing. This stanza also is to show that the old is being in contrast with the new. And we see that within the station itself. The station is a symbol for that clash that's happening. Each morning before the Eastern wink, I could peek into chinks of corrugated iron roofs. Okay, so this is where we know that the speaker is talking about where he lives, which is close to the station. And he says, each morning before the Eastern wink would be the sunrise. So before the sun even came up, before the sun could even flood into the roof of his house, which was cracked. We looked at the picture of the corrugated iron roofs. It's usually the type of roof that's put on top of a shed. This is the roof of the place where he sleeps. It says, I would hear blinking in my sleep. And the blinking could be the horn, which is what we talked about. We also talked about the possibility of the blinking is like the flashing light on a train as it's coming through before it stops. But that's probably the horn that's coming through before it stops. A rumbling, we know that trains are noisy, they're really loud. As of agitated steel hoofs, again, a reference to the development of transportation modes from horses to trains. The clank and clatter of rolling wheels, grousing about carriages swaying under strain. And so this is also showing there's more weight on the train than there maybe has been in years past. And so that pressure can be heard in the way that it stops at the train station. So there's a lot of auditory imagery that's happening right here within this paragraph. Talking about hearing the blinking, rumbling, he can hear the agitated still hoofs, clank and clatter. All of that is disrupting his sleep, and it's also disrupting his life. He's going to go on and talk about other auditory things that he hears, but it's going to be the conversations that he overhears when he's at the train station. So he says, sometimes I heard cramped passengers chatter and grumble above others. Cramped passengers meaning cramped. There's lots of them in one space. Chatter and grumble, they're just making small talk back and forth to each other. And we know a lot of small talk is usually grumbling or complaining. And then he says bemoaning or complaining. Increased house rents, remember we talked about that, is a form of gentrification, or it's a symptom of gentrification. Early morning house raids, so again, the over-policing of the area that's happening within Pimville Station, and then the sordid drunkenness of their neighbors. So in class, we talked about how potentially these first two lines, the increased house rate rents and the early morning house raids, it would be the native South Africans who were talking on the train, but then the sordid drunkenness of their neighbors could be the white South Africans who have moved into the area who are complaining about the black South Africans that they live next to. So many times have I thought about the defiant stance of a railway station in a location. So he thinks about this railway station as being almost defiant of what was going on in South Africa at the time, because there's so much culture that's happening in one place. You see the old South African culture that is experiencing the pressure of the white South Africans, the British specifically, who are moving into the area. And so he's like, what a place where you see all of these different people of different social statuses and of different races who are coming into one area. And then he ends the poem by saying, my very first experience of what is permissively called separate and equal amenities. Okay, so there he's saying that using Pimville Station is like the great equalizer, where when you're at Pimville Station, it's almost like everyone is equal, but at the same time as he has witnessed the changes to Pimville Station that have happened over time, he realizes that whatever was separate from him or the other train stations that white people have historically used were definitely not equal, and he can tell that by the changes that have been slowly happening to Pimville Station. And so this is where he's being slightly sarcastic to end the poem, where he knows that this Pimville Station was not a separate and equal amenity for him, and that's evidenced by the changes that are developing as more white South Africans use the train station. So if we were to wrap this up, we would say that like maybe Sepamla's matter-of-fact language prevents any sort of sentimentality or any sort of sadness that's happening over the gentrification. The station's marked as having a higher status than its surroundings through signifiers of technology, like the light poles, and then also the light poles bring in light and communication. And by extension, that means civilization and other groups of people. And then the changes to Pimville Station, again, to reiterate, has the changes that it has undergone is evidence of the way that the train stations were not separate and equal, because they're trying to make them better in order to fit the use of the white South Africans. All right, so you guys can go back and re-listen to the parts of the poem that maybe you need some more clarification. I hope this was helpful for you. Don't forget to add notes to your poetry booklet, take a picture of it, and then submit it on Canvas. Thanks for listening.